Hello and welcome to this episode of the Smart Divorce Podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Richard Nobbs. Myself and Richard met, I guess, about 18 months ago virtually, but I don't think we've actually ever met in person. But Richard is one of my go-to people as a pensions on divorce expert. I'll let him introduce himself properly in just a second. But Richard, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to this. I've not done a podcast before, so quite excited. A bit nervous.
Excellent. You'll be absolutely fine. We've had lots of first-time podcasters on this podcast over the years. I seem to manage to twist a few people's arms. So do you want to start by telling our listeners a little bit about what you do for work and what that involves?
So I'm an actuary, and I own a company called Excalibur Actuaries, and we're one of the leading pension on divorce expert firms. We've got a team of over 20, including 6 qualified actuaries. I'm a member of the Pensions Advisory Group, which is where I think we first sort of met, at least sort of over video, and that's colloquially known as PAG. It comprises judges, barristers, solicitors, and other pension experts, and we've provided extensive guidance to those who work in this area on how to deal with pensions on divorce. So I'm the current chair of the PAG valuation working group. I'm, as I say, a qualified actuary, a fellow of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, a member of the Academy of Experts, and a member of the Expert Witness Institute.
That's quite a list.
Yeah, it is. I mean, actually, the area of working in a PODE is quite an unusual area. There aren't many actuaries. There aren't many people that work in this sort of niche area. And so what I wanted to make sure of is that, along with the work we do for PAG, to make sure that I'm looking at other areas where experts work and try and learn from wider fields.
Sure, that makes absolute sense. We had a gentleman on a couple of weeks ago who was talking about forensic accountancy, and he works in the divorce arena, but also does quite a lot of work in the criminal area as well. And yeah, I mean, if it had made sense, we'd have recorded a very long podcast about that. But I don't think it would have really fitted with our topic. So but yeah, it's great to have you on. You are one of my go-to pensions on divorce experts that I always recommend when people ask me who they should get their reports from. So it's great to be able to talk this through with you.
Thank you.
I think it'd be a great start to talk about PAG, because apart from the fact that the two of us are on the committee, it really is the seminal piece of work on guiding not just professionals working in this area, but also clients as well, although they might find the original PAG report quite a hard read. Do you want to just set out for us a little bit about what PAG is, why the report is so very important, and where our clients can find it other than in our show notes?
So why is it important? And yeah, it's been done by I think it's the Nuffield Foundation, and I think the origins of it probably come out of one of your previous guests, Reese Taylor. And there was some investigations, I think, by Reese and also Hilary Woodward, where they found that there was a lot of disparity in the reports provided by pension on divorce experts, which I'll shorten to PODEs. And so given that there was a big variety of results that was being provided, that then meant that you could often end up with quite different outcomes on divorce, depending on which pension expert you went to, and that doesn't really help anyone. And so they wanted to make sure that there was greater consistency. Part of this was actually making sure that the questions that you put to the pensions expert are more consistent. consistent. And if you've got more consistent questions and the pension experts are dealing with them more consistently, you'll still end up with some variation, but you should end up with a much tighter sort of range of results, and so hopefully more consistency throughout, basically throughout the UK on divorces, or certainly within England and Wales.
Absolutely. So the PAG report, as I say, is available. The link to the terribly long original report is in the show notes. And whilst it is written, I guess, essentially for professionals, it is, relatively speaking, in fairly plain English. However, there is a more accessible version, which is called the Survival Guide for Pensions on Divorce, which is available. And again, we'll put the link, produced by, I think it's Law for Life. It's on the Advice Now website, so we'll get that on there as well as a video that was also produced at the time, which is on YouTube. And again, the link will be available in there. But you are going to hear us referring to the PAG report as we go through this podcast recording, so that we thought it important to tell you what it is before we head off into the bulk of this conversation that we're going to have today. So I guess the most important thing is to start off by saying what a PODE is.
So a PODE's a pensions on divorce expert, and personally I'd differentiate between PODEs. You've got those that are advising one of the parties on their finances, typically IFAs like yourself, but it's not necessarily independent financial advisors, and those that are acting as single joint expert. And single joint expert is like Excalibur, where we need to be independent of both parties, and we're often appointed by both parties or their solicitors or by the court. So if you're an independent financial advisor, you might be required. I think it's probably good practice for an individual who's getting divorced to go and consult an IFA to try and find out about all of their finances, not just the pensions aspect, and talk to them about what's happened. Try and get them to understand budgets and do plans and stuff like that, and effectively next steps. And they may well help with setting out the questions you might put to a single joint expert. They might also be able to help talk through the single joint expert report when it comes back and deal with the implementation aspects. So I think that that's one part of it. That's one type of PODE. The other one, as I say, the single joint expert appointed by both parties or their solicitors or the court, and we just need to do effectively a very narrow piece of work of looking at the pensions, answering the questions that are put to us, and providing that in a report so that people can take it and ultimately reach a decision, or allow the court to reach a decision.
Absolutely. And you're, just to be 100% clear on this, because I think there can be a little bit of confusion about this, your job is not to provide advice as such, but more information. Would you say that was right?
Yeah, well, we're not authorized by the Financial Conduct Authority to provide advice. So what we will do is we'll try and provide some sort of pointers, shall we say. So, for example, some of the pensions, particularly defined benefit pensions, might be available earlier than the individual realizes. And so we might say, the normal retirement age of the pension is 65, but it can be accessed at age 60 without reduction. Now that's really helpful information as far as the individual's concerned, because hang on a second, here's some free money, effectively, so and that'll often be available in places like the local government pension scheme, depending on when individuals have worked. So we're not providing financial advice, but I think it's worth just sort of reading through the report, seeing if there are any pointers, and make sure that you're talking it through with your own independent financial advisor who can, hopefully will have already picked up on a number of those things, and can actually provide the correct correct financial advice.
Perfect. Wonderful. So if I'm a client and I'm getting divorced, why might I need one of your reports other than because I've got a pension? Is it as straightforward as if I've got a pension and my ex has got a pension, we need a report?
Not necessarily, but ultimately you've got what's known as the matrimonial pot. You've got all of the assets that both of you have. Now that can be joint assets, or it can be assets held as an individual, held separately. It includes the home, it can include savings, investments, cars, and it should include pensions. Now, the pensions can only be held by one or the other, but under divorce, the law and under the law, each party needs a fair share of that matrimonial pot. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's going to be 50-50, but that's effectively a starting point. And yeah, there may be differences in pensions. Most of the time, there is significant differences in pensions. And so we're asked to do a report about providing some sort of equality. And that might also include things like offsetting, so that if there's some sort of adjustment, one party gets more of the non-pensions assets like the home, and less pension sharing, we can put a report on those issues, and they can then hopefully reach a decision, or allow the court to reach a decision.
Perfect. And so you did say not necessarily.
Yeah.
So in what circumstances might you not need a PODE report, even if you are looking at the pensions and looking at the possibility of dividing them?
Right now, right at the outset, you were talking about the PAG guide, a guide to the treatment of pensions on divorce. It's a snappily named publication, and it's 176 pages. So I think it's difficult to ask your listeners to read through all of that, and to be frank, they just don't want to. But there are a couple of key sections, section 6 and section 7. And basically paragraphs 610 and 611, I think they are, talk about when you might want to involve a PODE and when you might not want to involve a PODE. And so there are some good illustrations of where a PODE report might not be worthwhile. It's basically a waste of money, and where that includes where the pensions are all defined contribution. There are no implicit guarantees. You need to watch out for there being implicit guarantees. So talk to your IFA around that. Where none of the benefits have been taken, so particularly tax-free cash lump sums, and you're of similar ages. So if you've got pretty much all defined contribution with those provisos, you don't necessarily need a report. Younger people, typically under 40, and not in the uniformed services, so the armed forces, the police and firefighters, where the pensions are worth less than 100 grand. That is an area where actually a pensions report probably not good value. And also where the parties are in public sector only. And I'd add on to that, if they're providing they're intending to retire on the lower of the retirement ages, if they've got, shall we say, the old style final salary pensions and the new style career averaged revalued earnings or care benefits. So if they're retiring if they're expected to retire at the younger ages or before, then don't need a PODE report there. But if you are offsetting, i.e. doing some sort of trade between pension sharing and the other non-pension asset, then think about whether you do. Certainly, if you're in the public sector, I would still get a PODE report there, because the public sector cash equivalents aren't necessarily a reflection of current values.
Sure. Okay. That makes some sense. I know this is a question that I'm asked almost daily. I have an email coming through to me saying, do I need an actuary? Do I need a PODE report for this?
And we get asked, and sometimes we will say, actually, you don't need a report, and we'll refer the people to the PAG guide and say, based on what you've said, it isn't required under A, B, and C. And I think that sometimes helps solicitors, because they don't want to find out that they've made the wrong sort of recommendation. And we're happy to answer that for people who are litigants in person as well. So yes, there's some good guidance around there. We've got more than enough work to be doing. We don't actually want to be doing reports which aren't value for money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the majority of PODEs would say the same as well.
Yeah.
I know that you have plenty of work coming in. I guess the next question is, apart from emailing me, which seems to happen a lot of the time, how do people find a pensions on divorce expert? And I guess the simple answer is, well, you can email Richard, because his details are going to be in the show notes. But failing that, and perhaps wanting to maybe talk to more than one pension on divorce expert, and maybe to know that they were going to get someone who was going to do a really good job for them, where on earth do you start finding a PODE?
Well, again, I think I'd split this between an IFA PODE and a single joint expert PODE.
Sure.
For the individual advice, it's not all about pensions. You need advice on all aspects of the finances. So the IFA wants to understand all of your sort of sources of income, savings, other assets, such as the house, what the outgo is, what your state pension build up is, and what your retirement expectations are. Now, they may not be set in stone. Certainly, at the early stages, you might still be in sort of shock, or and still need to go through some sort of decision-making process. But I'd want to be talking to somebody who is an expert in that. And I think, from my understanding, you know, you get PODE IFAs, but not all IFAs are PODEs. Quite few financial advisors that I come across actually have good pensions on divorce knowledge. They may have good pensions knowledge, but not pensions on divorce knowledge. And so I think that that's an important thing. You need to be able to explain, or the IFA needs to be able to explain what's happening in straightforward language. If you don't understand what the IFA is saying, I wouldn't appoint them. And it might take a few goes. If you've not got that much knowledge about managing your own money, managing your own finances, the IFA is going to have to need to get to know you. You're going to have to get to know the IFA. There's going to be a relationship develop, because there needs to be a fair bit of trust. I mean, it needs to be an awful lot of trust between the parties. So I think that's an important thing, and it might take a few goes before you get comfortable. I think, as far as single joint expert reports is concerned, or single joint expert PODEs, I've personally been concerned about the quality of some of the SJE reports of some PODEs. And I think, unless you've got a really good understanding of pensions on divorce, it's difficult to identify who to appoint as an SJE and who to be wary about. I've seen instances where somebody's been appointed as an SJE because they've done a cheap report, or because it's been done quickly, and that's just backfired because the report has been fundamentally flawed. That results in pension sharing that's ultimately wrong, and if the if you can spot that there is something wrong, and sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but if the solicitors see that there's something wrong, then either the individuals or the solicitors or the courts have then got to try and unpick that, unpick what's being said, and come to their own conclusions, or appoint somebody else who actually knows what they're doing. Either way, you end up with potentially large legal fees, and perhaps kicking the problem down. You might end up with further delays. It could put you back several months, maybe a year. So yeah, how do you find a single joint expert? I think the main single joint experts just provide single joint expert reports as their principal business. So we're not the only ones, but we only provide expert reports, and we've got a team of experts similar to the main SJE firms, and as I say, we generally don't provide wider financial advice, so we're not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. I'd certainly consider appointing one of the PAG valuation committee members. They're set out in the back of the PAG report, so you can always look up them and appoint them or talk to them. There are some good firms that aren't actually involved on the PAG valuation committee, and so you can always talk to somebody, one of the PAG members, and say, look, is there anybody else that you can recommend, or deal with it that way. And I'd certainly recommend talking to the PODE, call the PODE, talk to them, tell them about the pensions that you've got, and the instructions that you want to put to them. Ask them about their experience, specifically on those pension schemes, and get a quote in writing. But I think if you're talking to them about their specific experience within those pension schemes, and how many of those cases they might have dealt with over the past few months, that will be a good indication of whether they they should be able to talk about some of the nuances of the pension scheme.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And sadly, I've and this is not wanting to scare anybody, but I think it's really important that you do pick an expert who knows what they're doing. I've been asked by solicitors to have a look over PODE reports, and sadly said I can't comment on this to your client because it's not accurate, it's not right. There are too many errors in there that you really need to go back and resolve those before we can get any further. But yeah, there are pensions on divorce experts who work as IFAs, as Richard said, who can presumably guide you also as to who perhaps they've seen used before, and they've seen reports from that they've been happy with, which is where I started referring my business from. It's like, seen reports by them, they've been good, they've made sense, let's recommend them. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And in terms of IFA PODE's resolution website, you can search accredited financial advisors on there. There are sadly not very many of us. I think there are 35 in England and Wales, but that's certainly a good starting point if you've been through the accreditation, which is
A distinguished breed.
Huge part of which is pensions based. So all of those people should have an idea what's going on. So I guess my next question is, and we've talked about the fact that not all PODEs are equal, but in terms of those who work as SJEs, do they all work in the same way?
I think so. I don't know exactly how our competitors work, but I think certainly the calculations are broadly are often broadly similar. Sometimes there's a difference in interpretation of instructions, but I wouldn't necessarily get too hung up about that. I think the main differences are some will do basically the information gathering. They will go to all of the pension schemes and ask for the information. And Excalibur's not, we don't do that. We prefer to look through the information that we're provided with. We then set it out what further information is in an email, and we expect that that can then be basically copied and pasted into an email to the pension scheme administrators, and that means then that the divorcing parties are able to go and get that information. We think it keeps the costs down, and the pension scheme administrators often have service level agreements with their pension scheme trustees, i.e. with their bosses, and those service level agreements will include sort of turnaround times for asking for information from members. Doesn't necessarily mean from third parties. I think
Yeah.
we certainly find that where we are involved in data gathering, and sometimes we'll do it, particularly where there is something complex. We don't want to, end up with the member being a post box, but we will get involved sometimes, and it can sometimes take quite a lot of time for the pension schemes to respond. So there's an area of difference. The other area I think is probably litigants in person. Some do take litigants in person, some don't. We're currently prepared to take litigants in person, but yeah, shall we say, sometimes it depends. Well, they've got to
Fair
be,
enough.
if they're litigants in person, they've got to be cooperative at the end of the day. If you end up with, sometimes you think that they're both litigants in person and both complying with the sort of court processes, and then you find that one isn't. And so in those circumstances, it's often just better to get a solicitor involved.
Sure. Just for clarification, just for the podcast, for people who aren't au fait with the term litigants in person, we're talking about people who come direct to you as opposed to using a solicitor to guide them.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Fab. So we've talked a bit, and we talked right at the top of this podcast a bit about letters of instruction when you were talking about the PAG report and we were introducing that. So the letter of instruction is really, really important. Could you talk through what questions people should be asking? And I guess this is solicitors could benefit from this as well as litigants in person. Some guidance as to what questions are important to ask. The SJE, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Letters of instruction is a bit of a difficult balancing act, perhaps. Personally, I prefer to see a question ideally about equality of income. So we'd like equality of income at retirement, and ideally 1 or 2 retirement ages. What I don't like to see is we'd like equality of income at retirement ages 60, 62, 64, 66, because the more questions you ask, the more complex the report, the more expensive the report, and basically you end up with something that is incomprehensible, and actually it wastes a lot of fees. So it costs more from the SJE's perspective to provide. The solicitor needs to spend a lot longer reading it and trying to get to the bottom of it. So certainly, equality of income, 1 or 2 ages. I don't think it generally needs much more than that. Some of the solicitors might also look at equality of value. I think certainly if you're both of a similar age, I'd ignore that. I wouldn't bother having equality of value if you are within sort of a couple of years of each other. It's probably not worth asking it. As I say, it's just an extra set of results that you've got to argue about. You might include some ring fencing. PAG sort of generally sort of discourages ring fencing in what's known as needs cases, and so a needs case can still be significantly sized pensions. So if you are going to do ring fencing, i.e. of something like the premarital accrued pension, then just ask for one or two ring fencing. Please don't ask for several sort of ring fencing periods, because it just results in higher costs and a more complicated report. And finally, you might ask for offsetting figures. If you're unsure about offsetting figures, I'd certainly ask for it at the outset, because it's a heck of a lot easier to provide the do all of the calculations at one time, rather than us go and do a pension sharing report, and then you go, oh, hang on a second, we'd like to come back and ask you some further questions. Please, can you do an offsetting calculation? That then just costs 3 or 4 times as much sometimes. So you might as well just ask for it at the outset.
Absolutely. One question that is kind of, again, a question that's fired at me regularly. I'm sure it's fired at you as well. And that is, if we're looking at possibly a quick equalizing value, for example, why can I not just add up the CEVs, the cash equivalent values, and divide them by 2?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So you, okay, so cash equivalents, different pension schemes will calculate cash equivalents in different manners, and there are good reasons for that. When I'm wearing a pension scheme hat. So if I'm advising a pension scheme, that a pension scheme has to calculate cash equivalent, i.e. the value of the benefits, and it's generally based on that pension scheme's own investment strategy. And so if the pension scheme has a very conservative investment strategy, so it is taking very little risk, then actually its expected returns tend to be much lower. And because if you're getting very low investment returns, you need a lot of money to provide the pension. Conversely, if you've got a pension scheme that is invested in, shall we say, more risky assets, and it doesn't have, we're not talking about betting on the 330 from Kempton. We're just talking about investing in general sort of stocks and shares. So that might be Sainsbury's, Tesco's, it might be some of the banking sector. It could be anything around there. If it's got an investment strategy like that, it's more likely to be assuming higher investment returns, and so obviously with higher investment returns you need a smaller sum of money to provide an amount of pension. And so what you can sometimes find is one pension scheme with a conservative investment strategy might have a cash equivalent of £100,000, whereas another one might have a more shall we say optimistic or higher return investment strategy, and it might only have a cash equivalent of £50,000. So you've got there a doubling of the cash equivalent for exactly the same amount of pension. And so the pensions are not comparable. You've got exactly the same thing with the public sector. So a public sector cash equivalent is not necessarily comparable to a private sector defined benefit cash equivalent. You know, they can be, again, fundamentally different, and so you then really require the SJE PODE to actually look at the underlying pensions and saying, okay, how much do I think that is worth? You know, the underlying investment strategy of the actual pension scheme is not relevant. What is relevant is what the pension scheme will actually provide, and so that's what you're asking your SJE to look into, and so that's why we don't generally like using the cash equivalents of pension schemes. Yes, they're needed as part of the calculation, but when you're actually looking at the values of those pensions, they're not particularly helpful. And one of the other things that we will do is when we're doing our analysis, we will also probably look at which of them is the best to share, i.e. which one of those defined benefit schemes or defined contribution schemes offers the best terms, and that actually improves both divorcing parties' outcomes. The person with the pension actually has to share less of that pension for there to be equality, and both of them end up with higher pensions after sharing. So that's actually a really important, but probably little discussed point.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's really important to talk about, because it is the real crux of why you really need to get an SJE involved, where there are a number of pensions, particularly where there are DB schemes involved, or, as you mentioned at the beginning, these guarantees on DC schemes. And it, you know, it's important to check, if you're not sure, if your solicitor's not sure, speak to a pensions on divorce expert, whether that be somebody like Richard or somebody like myself, just to make sure that if a PODE report's needed, that it is being requested, and that it's being requested as early on as is humanly possible. And we are coming to the end of our conversation. I told you we would easily fill the
Yeah,
time that we had
absolutely, you
together.
did.
I guess that the important thing from the litigant in person's perspective is the guidance available easily on how to instruct yourself as an SJE, themselves as a couple? How do they go about doing that, and where can they access guidance on that?
Yeah, we've got some guidance on our website. It's probably not the most sort of detailed, but you know, it contains a section on instructions that includes a template letter of instruction that's basically based on the PAG version. So that's in there. Whilst the template letter of instruction is drafted as if it's from solicitors, just replace the names of the solicitors, say, you know, who you are and that you're acting as litigants in person. You know, provide that along with the pensions information. Again, on our website, we set out what pensions information we want. Get whatever you can. I would suggest, if it isn't all sort of immediately available, just give us what is available. We can review it, ask any questions around, you know, clarification of the letter of instruction. I wouldn't necessarily get too hung up on getting the precise wording. You know, if it's not perfectly clear, we'll come back and say, right, this is what we're going to do unless you agree otherwise. And yeah, we'll review all the pensions information. If not everything is there, we set out clearly what is required. You copy and paste that to the pension schemes, and yeah, hopefully within a few weeks they will respond, and you can send it over. Often where the pension information is sort of, shall we say, not forthcoming, we can sometimes find workarounds. You know, we've dealt with pretty much all of the main UK pension schemes, and so similar to the main SJE experts, have got a sort of library around there, and so we can probably take a few shortcuts if that information isn't quickly coming back.
Fantastic. And I guess the one other question sort of as a result of that, we talked about asking for equality of income at a specified retirement age, and perhaps 1 or 2, but certainly not a range of, 35 that we sometimes see. If I'm a litigant in person and I'm not being guided by a solicitor, and have crazily not seen a financial planner as well, how do I know what retirement age is to pick to ask you to calculate the equality of income on, or are you able to guide on that at all?
We're generally prepared to, if the instructions say equality of income upon retirement,
Yeah.
that might be a, shall we say, a suitable catch-up or catch-all, or you might say retirement at a particular age, the retirement age of the main pension scheme. You can also ask the SJE, to include any other age which they may think appropriate. I wouldn't have any hesitation about putting things back to the SJE to, because as a single joint expert, my role is to be impartial and to be seen to be impartial. Our duty is to the court, and I want to make sure that that the report basically is fair, is down the middle, and if there are material issues that need to be raised, that the court or the parties need to be aware of, then I want to make sure that that's in the report. So if in doubt, I would say put it back to the SJE and say, what do you recommend around here?
Perfect. I'm glad you said that, because that's what I always tell people to do. So that's handy. And these reports, they look overwhelming, and they can look very long when you first get them, but I do think it's important to read them through, because as Richard said, there's so much information in there that is useful to you. And if nothing else, get a highlighter pen, get a printout of the report. I am old school. Get a printout of the report and highlight the bits that you feel like that might be important, and go through that document like that. You look like you've got something even more useful to say.
Not necessarily more useful, but I think it's really important that the reports are understandable. You might not understand all of the minutiae of the report. The whole reason you appoint an expert is because the stuff is complicated, potentially complicated. There's some lots of calculations in the background, but there should be a common sense explanation for how the pension sharing is working, and so somebody should be able to get the gist of a pension sharing report, and if somebody hasn't, they should be able to go to their financial advisor and get all the solicitor and get them to walk them through each page of the report, and certainly we've been sometimes offering, particularly for more complex reports, where we just walk both parties through the report to make sure that they have understood how we've gone about the calculations, and they understand the implications for it. And I think that's a really important part of the service.
Absolutely. No, totally agree. Before we wrap up today's session, is there anything that I've missed, anything I should have asked you that I haven't?
Not really. I think the thing I would just sort of plead is on instructions to keep things simple. For us, it's much easier to provide a report where the instructions are simple. That keeps our fees down. It keeps the solicitors' fees down. It means that there's less issues to argue over, and so if that can happen, hopefully everybody will be happier.
Excellent. That is a brilliant point to end on. And I mean, Absolute agreement with you. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been brilliant to have you with us, and I know that that has provided some really useful insights. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers will have got a lot from that, so thank you.
Thank you, I've really enjoyed it.